Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. And GT, the bridge smelled like burnt copper and cooked meat. Admiral Jack Harlan, codename Mad, did not look for the source. He already knew. 3 screens were dead on the forward console, 2 more flickered between data and static, unable to decide which was more honest. The tactical overlay showed the Veari destroyers in a clean triangular formation, holding distance, methodical, unhurried. They did not need to rush. They were not the ones burning. The Iron Widow was. Portside armor had been cored through on the second volley. The third had taken the forward gun battery offline and killed everyone inside it. The ship's spine was intact, barely, but the stress readings climbing across Harlan's console told him it would not stay that way. He could feel the hits through the deck. Plating, not vibration impact. The difference between a ship taking fire and a ship being disassembled. He watched the formation hold. The Veari were dismantling him, one volley at a time, each strike placed with a precision that felt almost contemptuous. No wasted energy, no panic, just a cold arithmetic of superior range, superior shielding, superior everything. Harlan's cybernetic eye shifted to the internal feed, while his remaining organic eye stayed fixed on the tactical overlay. Deck 7, Deck 9, Deck 11. The Veari had come aboard 20 minutes ago. 3 breach points, all simultaneous, all placed exactly where the Iron Widow's internal defense grids had failed in the first exchange. Not luck, precision. Their cutting teams had been through the hull before anyone fully understood what they were targeting. He watched the feeds and said nothing. Boarding Sergeant Griggs heard them. Before he saw them, the sound was wrong. Not boots on deck plating, something lighter, faster, a quick articulated movement that spread weight differently than a human stride. He pressed his back to the bulkhead, raised one fist, and the 4 people behind him stopped moving. The corridor was dark. Power rerouting had killed the lights on this section 20 minutes ago, and nobody had fixed it because nobody had time. Emergency strips along the floor threw everything into red shadow. Long shapes, short visibility. The kind of environment that should have favored ambush. The Veari did not seem to care. They moved in a column, tight spacing. Weapons raised and tracking in short, precise arcs. 4 of them visible, probably more behind. Their suits were smooth and form-fitted. Joints sealed, no exposed tubing or patched plating. The weapons they carried were long-barreled and thin, built for accuracy at range, and they moved like soldiers who had never once been in a fight that did not go exactly as planned. Griggs let the first one pass the corner. Then he stepped out and hit the second one with his shoulder at full weight. The Veari went into the wall. Griggs grabbed the weapon arm, drove an elbow into what he hoped was a joint, felt something give, and put the alien on the floor. The corridor erupted. His people came off the walls. 2 shotguns fired in the enclosed space, and the noise was physical, a pressure wave that hit the chest and did not stop. The lead Veari spun and raised its weapon, and Petrov hit it from the side with a fire suppression canister swung. 2-handed, the alien dropped. The canister came down again. The rear of the Vaori column turned to run. Griggs shot the rearmost one himself. Single round close range, he did not. Watch it fall. Move, he said. They moved. Deck 9 was worse. The Vaori breach team there had made it to the secondary engineering junction before Chief Engineer Igor Kowalski's people found them. The junction was a choke point, 3 corridors meeting at a reinforced hub, with exposed conduit running along every surface. It was the worst place in the ship to have a firefight because everything in it was critical and nothing in it had any cover except the machinery itself. The Vaori used the machinery they set up fast and clean, 2 covering the approaches, 2 more working on something at the main conduit panel. Kowalski did not know what they were doing, and he did not stop to find out. He came around the corner with his plasma torch already burning and ran straight at the nearest one. The alien fired. The shot took Kowalski across the left shoulder and spun him, but did not stop him. He closed the distance in 2 steps and put the torch against the joint where the helmet met the suit collar and held it there. The Vaori made a sound he did not have a word for. He let it fall and turned to the next one. His people came through behind him. Wrenches breaching bars. One improvised weapon that had started life as a coolant pump handle. The kind of thing that had earned Kowalski the call sign wrench many years ago and somehow never stopped being useful. The fight in the junction lasted less than 2 minutes and left the walls marked in ways that would not clean off. Kowalski pressed his hand against his shoulder. The suit had partially absorbed it. The flesh underneath had not. He looked at what the bypass work, careful, precise. They had been 30 seconds from cutting primary power to the bridge. He closed the panel and welded it shut. Wrench to bridge, he said into the comm talk. Harlan said, Junction 9 secure. They were going for your lights. Harlan could hear Kowalski breathing hard through the comm static. How bad are you? I've had worse. You haven't? No, Kowalski said, I haven't. Deck 11 took longer. The Vaori team there had split after breaching, half pushing toward the crew quarters, half moving for the weapons locker on the secondary armory corridor. Griggs pulled 2 of his people off deck 9 and pushed them through a maintenance shaft to cut off the armory approach. They came out of the shaft hatch directly into the middle of the Vaori team, and the fight that followed was conducted entirely at arm's length in a space too narrow to raise a weapon properly. It was fast and violent. When it was over, Griggs stood in the corridor and counted his people. The crew quarters team had barricaded. Civilians, off-duty crew, 2 medics, and a handful of engineers who had grabbed whatever was close when the alarms hit. The Vaori had pushed to the first barricade and stopped, not because the resistance was strong, which it was not, but because the corridor geometry had collapsed into something inefficient for their doctrine. Tight spacing, broken sight lines, no room to maintain formation or optimal firing distance. The people behind the barricade were throwing pressurized canisters and welding equipment through gaps in stacked furniture, and the Vaori were disciplined enough not to force a fight that no longer favored them. By the time Griggs reached them, the Vaori were already withdrawing from the position he hit them from behind. It was a short conversation. He stood over the last one and looked at it for a moment, The alien's chest was still moving. Its weapon was 3 m away. It looked up at him with eyes that were too large and too still. And he saw something in them that was not fear exactly, but was adjacent to it, the specific expression of a thing that had expected to win and had run completely out of explanations. Griggs picked up the alien weapon, turned it in his hands, set it down. Then he went back to work. Admiral Harland heard Sergeant Griggs on the comm 19 minutes after the first breach alarm clear. Harland looked at his board. Deck 7911, all feeds showing human movement only. No Vaori contact signals inside the hole. The boarding party was finished. His people had paid for it in ways the casualty numbers on his screen could not fully describe. But the Iron Widow was his again, for whatever that was worth. Kowalski's voice came through next, rougher than before. Harland, I need you to look at the structural report I just pushed to your board. Harland looked. He did not say anything. For a moment, the Iron Widow's port frame was fractured in 3 places. The forward armor was gone in 2 sections. Internal atmosphere was venting from 4 breach points, 2 of which Kowalski's teams had not yet reached. Power to the main gun battery was not coming back. The secondary battery had maybe 2 volleys left before the capacitors failed entirely. Outside, the very formation had not moved, still clean, still patient, still running their geometry. The next volley would finish it. How long can you hold atmosphere in the crew sections? Harlan asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less if they hit us again. They will hit us again. Then less. Harlan looked at the tactical overlay. The lead Vari destroyer was positioned at the point of the triangle. Closest ship. Largest target. Its shields were reading strong, but its profile was wide. The kind of wide that came from a ship built for firepower and speed, not for surviving something running directly into it at full thrust. Nobody built warships to survive being rammed. Nobody sane did that. Kowalski, Harlan said. What does the Iron Widow have left in the engines? A pause, full thrust for about 4 minutes. Before the coupling fails. 4 minutes is enough. Another pause. Longer. Admiral, get your people into suits. Anyone who can move gets moving. I want everyone in the forward sections, and I want them armed. You're going to ram them. I'm going to ram them. That will kill the ship. The Iron Widow is already dead. I'm just deciding what she hits on the way down. Copy that, Kowalski said. Give me 6 minutes. You have 4. Harlan cut the channel. Turned to his navigator. The man was young, face gray with smoke residue and someone else's blood on his collar. Plot me a direct intercept on the lead destroyer, Harlan said, full thrust. No corrections. The navigator nodded. Harlan looked at the line on the screen, clean and straight and final. Outside, the Vaori formation began to adjust, the lead destroyer shifting slightly, recalibrating for the next firing solution. They saw a burning ship running out of options, and they were preparing the last shot with the same cold patience they had shown for the entire engagement. They did not see what the Iron Widow was doing, not yet. Harlan gripped the edge of his console with his cybernetic hand. The metal creaked slightly under the pressure. All hands, he said into the ship wide. Come. His voice was flat and even and did not Waver. Brace for full thrust. Forward teams prepare for breach entry. This is not a retreat. He released the comm, looked at the lead. Destroyer one more time. Full thrust, he said, now. The Iron Widow lurched forward. The engine screamed. The hull groaned along. Every fractured seam. Loose debris cascaded across the bridge. From surfaces that had been holding it. By friction alone. The Veari destroyer grew on the screen. Vast. Then faster. The Veari formation broke, the two. Flanking ships peeling away, the lead. Destroyer firing its maneuvering. Thrusters in sudden desperate. Correction. Its weapon cycling for an emergency shot that came 2 seconds too late and struck the Iron Widow's already dead forward section without changing anything that mattered. The distance closed to nothing. Impact was not a sound, it was a transition. One state of existence ending and another beginning without a clear line. Between them, the Iron Widow's bow drove into the Veari destroyer's midsection, and the two ships became one. Catastrophic geometry of torn metal and venting atmosphere and structural collapse that neither vessel had been designed to survive. Whole sections of the Iron Widow punched through into the Veari hull. Corridors became corridors, compartments breached into compartments. The joining was violent and total and left no clean edge anywhere. The Veari destroyer's interior lighting shifted to emergency red. Through the breach, through the torn and twisted metal that had been two separate ships and was now one ragged wound. The first human figures were already moving. They did not wait. Waiting had never been how humans thought. The breach was not a door, it was a wound. 40 m of torn metal where two ships had driven into each other and refused to separate. Hull plating folded back in jagged pedals, conduit and structural cable hanging across the opening like intestines. Atmosphere on the Iron Widow side was gone, had been gone since the collision. The suits were the only reason anyone was still breathing, and the suits were patched and old, and 3 of them were already reading amber on seal integrity. Griggs went through first, not because it was tactically sound, because someone had to go first, and waiting was not something he knew how to do. The gravity on the Veari side was wrong. Slightly lower, slightly off axis from the collision damage, enough that movement felt like moving through memory of movement rather than the thing itself. Emergency lighting had kicked in, deep blue rather than red, and it turned everything into shadow and suggestion. Griggs swept his weapon across the corridor beyond the breach and found it empty. He signaled. His people came through behind him. Not just his boarding teams, but engineers with breaching bars, too. Medics with their kit bags slung across their backs, mechanics who had grabbed whatever was close when the collision hit and followed the people moving forward, because forward was the only direction that was not the Iron Widow. Coming apart. A handful of civilians who had survived the impact and had nowhere else to go. Griggs looked at them for 1 second. Then he pointed the ones without weapons toward the rear and kept moving. The Veari were 30 m in. They had not expected the breach to produce what it produced. Griggs could see it in the way they were positioned. A standard response formation, weapons raised, covering the breach point at the distance their doctrine said was optimal. For engagement, clean spacing, good angles, built for fighting a military boarding party that would come through carefully and establish a perimeter and move in controlled bounds. Not built for this. Griggs picked up speed in the low gravity and covered the 30 in the kind of time that did not allow for target acquisition adjustments and hit the nearest Vehari at full momentum. The alien went back into the corridor, while the two behind it fired. Both shots went wide because the spacing was wrong, because doctrine had not accounted for a large human moving at that speed and that gravity, because everything was wrong at once. The people behind Griggs came through the breach running. Shotguns in enclosed alien corridor sounded like the end of small arguments. The Vehari formation disengaged and fell back in good order, not routing, not panicking, but executing a disciplined fighting withdrawal with the precision of soldiers trained for controlled retreat. Under pressure, Griggs did not let them get clean distance. He pushed hard, keeping his people close enough that the Vehari could not reestablish their optimal range. It was ugly and it was costly. Petrov went down in the first 40 seconds, a clean shot through the suit at the thigh, and two more of his people were reading amber on oxygen before they had cleared the first junction. But they were moving, and the Vehari were moving backward. Kowalski was not moving forward. He had come through the breach with the others, and then immediately turned left down a corridor that ran parallel to the main push, moving away from the fighting rather than toward it. Nobody questioned it. They had learned not to question the wrench when he had that look on his face, the one that meant he was already 3 problems ahead of everyone else and did not have time to explain the route. The corridor was vacuum. He could feel it in his suit, pressure reading flat, temperature dropping, the specific quality of silence that was not silence at all, but the absence of a medium for sound to travel through. He moved carefully, one hand trailing the wall, reading the ship through the surface, vibration, stress patterns, the way the metal flexed under his grip. Every ship had a logic. Human ships had a logic he had spent 30 years learning until it was instinct. He had fixed drives on ships that were already dead, rerouted power through systems that had no business conducting. It kept the Iron Widow flying for 6 years past the point where she should have been decommissioned. Alien ships had a logic too. You just had to know what to pay attention to. He stopped at a junction and looked at the conduit routing along the ceiling. The Vehari ran their power distribution differently, not along the spine the way human ships did, but in a branching pattern that spread load across multiple redundant pathways, harder to knock out with a single hit, harder to reroute manually. But the branches had to meet somewhere, and where they met was where the main engineering spaces would be. He followed the conduit. His shoulder was a steady, specific pain that he had categorized and set aside. The suit's emergency sealant had handled the breach in the fabric. The flesh underneath was a problem for later. He passed through a pressure door, still functional, still cycling, the Vehari automated systems maintaining it even the middle of everything. He noted that the ship's basic systems were still running, damaged but alive. That mattered. Through the door the corridor was pressurized. He cracked his helmet seal slightly and took one breath of alien atmosphere, thin, slightly acrid cold, and resealed immediately. breathable in an emergency. Not comfortable. He noted that too. He kept moving. The Vayari commander aboard the destroyer was named something that humans would not have been able to pronounce. His crew called him by his rank designation, which was the Vayari way. Personal names were for family and the dead. In the hierarchy of a Vayari warship, the commander was the formation, and the formation was the commander, and both existed only in relation to function. He stood in the command center, undamaged, sealed, 2 pressure doors between him and the breach, and watched his tactical display show him things his training had not prepared him for. The humans had come through the breach in a mass, not a military formation, not a structured assault. A mass. Personnel of multiple functions, mixed weapons, mixed equipment, moving with the coherence of a thing that did not know it was supposed to wait for orders. His response team had engaged at optimal range, and the humans had simply closed the distance faster than the engagement parameters had projected. He had pulled his soldiers back, reestablished a line in the pressurized sections where their equipment functioned at full capacity. Long corridors, clean fields of fire. The humans would have to come to them through bottlenecks, and when they did, the geometry would be correct again. He was also watching the external feeds. The 2 remaining destroyers had established flanking positions around the merged wreck. They were running firing solution calculations that kept returning the same problem. The drive core of his ship was inside the potential blast radius of every viable firing angle. Destroying the humans meant destroying the drive core. Destroying the drive core meant a detonation that would damage both remaining vessels. The fleet commander aboard the 2nd destroyer had opened a command channel. Authorization was being requested. He did not give it. Not yet. His people were still alive inside the ship. The hierarchy required confirmation of total loss before authorization to fire on a compromised vessel could be granted. That was doctrine. That was law. He intended to resolve this before that authorization became necessary. He turned to his defense coordinator and issued new instructions. Corridor 7, seal it and vent it. Corridor 12, lock the pressure doors and hold the junction. Draw the humans into the long approach on Corridor 9 and eliminate them. There, the defense coordinator relayed the orders. The formation adjusted. Clean, precise, controlled. Griggs hit the sealed door on Corridor 7 and knew immediately what it meant. Back, he said. They pulled back 10 m 8 seconds later. The door pressure gauge on the wall. Alien script, but gauges looked like gauges dropped to 0. They had vented the corridor ahead. Anyone caught in there without a suit would already be dead. His people had suits, but Corridor 7 was now a vacuum trap with a sealed door at the far end and no cover between here and there. Alternative route, he said. Maintenance shaft, one of his engineers said. She was pointing at a panel in the floor, hexagonal bolts, alien design. But a panel was a panel. Runs parallel. I saw the junction layout. On the way in. Open it, she opened it. The shaft beyond was dark and narrow and not built for human dimensions, but it connected. Griggs looked at it for 1 second, then looked at the 4 people closest to him. You, he said. With me. Everyone else holds here and makes noise. They made noise. Griggs and his four went into the shaft. The Vaori defense line on Corridor 9 was solid. 6 soldiers, good spacing, covering a 40 m approach with no significant cover available to anything coming at them from the breach end. The commander had chosen well. In a straight fight, it was unwinnable for the humans. Griggs did not come from the breach end. He came out of a maintenance access panel in the ceiling directly above the rearmost Vaori position. The panel came off and he dropped onto the soldier beneath it, and the fight that followed lasted 11 seconds and was conducted entirely in silence because vacuum, there was no medium for sound, and the only noise was impact transmitted through contact and suit material. When it was over, the Vaori line had a gap in it. His people on the main corridor heard the signal, 3 taps on the wall, transmitted as vibration, and pushed. The Vaori line held for 30 seconds. Then the soldier on the right flank turned to respond to something behind him, and the soldier next to him adjusted to cover, and the spacing opened, and Griggs was already moving through the gap before it could close. The line broke, but the commander was not in Corridor 9. He was deeper in the ship, and he was already issuing new instructions, and the formation was already adjusting. And Griggs felt it in the pattern of the resistance, that there was a mind behind this that was coordinating everything in real time. He needed to find that mind. Kowalski found engineering. It was a large space by Vaori standards, 3 levels, open center, conduit and drive systems exposed along the walls in a way that suggested the Vaori did not fear their own crew the way human engineers feared theirs. No protective casing over the primary systems, everything exposed. He stood in the entrance and looked at it for a long moment. His hand was on the wall. The ship was talking to him through the metal. Stress patterns, vibration frequency, power flow. The drive core was running at reduced capacity, damaged by the collision but not destroyed. The weapon systems were offline on this side of the ship, also collision damage, but the power conduits feeding them were intact. That was important. He moved to the main console. Alien interface, completely unfamiliar layout. He ignored the layout and looked at the physical architecture. Switches were switches. Power junctions had a logic that transcended species. He found the main power distribution board by following the heaviest conduit to its origin point, and he stood in front of it and started learning it the way he learned everything, by touching it, by tracing connections, by understanding what each component was trying to do. His comm crackled, Harlan's voice tight and controlled. Wrench, the external feed just came back online. The 2 destroyers have stopped maneuvering. Kowalski kept his hands on the board. They found an angle. Probably. They are running firing solution. Confirmation. I give it 10 minutes before they commit. Kowalski looked at the power distribution board, at the weapons conduits, at the drive core reading on the secondary display. He had already figured out how to read. I only need 8 minutes, he said. Wrench. I know, Kowalski said. I understand what happens if I fail. He turned back to the board and started working. Griggs found the Vaori commander by following the quality of the resistance It had a shape to it, a coherence that radiated from one point. The Vary adjustments had purpose. Behind them, seals, repositioning, corridor control. All of it connected. Griggs had been in enough fights to recognize command presence the way some people recognized bad weather approaching. Not mystical. Pattern recognition built from years of close-range combat, where the difference between a disciplined enemy and a leaderless one was the difference between a hard fight and a massacre. The commander was in a secondary control room 2 levels up from the main corridor network. Griggs knew this because the defense of that room was different from the defense of everything else. Not just soldiers at the door. Soldiers positioned to create overlapping fields, positioned to make any approach cost maximum casualties. Positioned by someone who understood exactly what was being protected. He did not try to go through the door. He pulled back and looked at what he had available. One of his mechanics had been carrying a decompression charge since the breach. A tool designed for emergency hull separation, essentially a shaped explosive that could breach a sealed compartment. The mechanic had brought it because it was what he had grabbed when the collision happened, and he had not let go of it since. Griggs looked at the charge, looked at the ceiling above the secondary control room on the schematic his engineer had been sketching from memory since they entered the ship. If I put this in the right place, he said, the decompression will kill everyone inside, the mechanic said, including the commander. Yes. The mechanic handed him the charge. Without further comment, Griggs found the right place. He had to go through a crawl space that was not built for his dimensions, moving on his elbows for 11 m in a space that compressed his suit against his back on every breath. He placed the charge, set it for manual detonation, came back out. His people pulled back to a sealed section. He detonated it. The ceiling of the secondary control room failed. Decompression was instantaneous and total. The pressure door at the room's entrance buckled outward from the differential and then sealed again as the automated systems responded. Griggs waited 30 seconds. Then he opened the door. The Vary commander was still at his console, still upright. His suit had activated emergency pressure membrane. Automated, the kind of last resort survival system that activated when everything else failed. He was alive, his crew was not. He looked at Griggs. Griggs looked at him. The commander made a small movement near the console, subtle enough that Griggs did not recognize it as a threat until the tactical display went dark. Whatever command he had entered wiped navigation data, killed the command interface, some final denial of resources. He had done it deliberately and without panic. Then he straightened and put his hands at his sides in a posture Griggs did not understand culturally, but understood instinctively. He was done fighting. Griggs zip-tied him with human cable ties, the only restraint system he had, and left 2 people to watch him and moved. The Vary formation collapsed within 4 minutes of the commander going silent. Not immediately, but the adjustments stopped coming. The sealed corridor stayed sealed, instead of cycling to new configurations, and the soldiers defending the remaining positions were doing it from training rather than direction. Humans pushed through the gaps, through maintenance shafts and vented corridors, and pressure doors forced open with breaching bars through sections where gravity failed, and movement became a three-dimensional problem the Vari had not trained for, while humans solved it by grabbing whatever was fixed to the walls and pulling themselves forward. The advance was uneven, costly, slow, but it kept moving. Kowalski had the weapons conduit partially rerouted when Harlan's voice came through again. They are committing. Firing solution locked. Almost there, Kowalski said. His hands were inside the power distribution board. He was working by feel and logic and the specific intuition that came from 30 years of fixing things that were not supposed to be fixable. One conduit rerouted, the second coupling was wrong. The Vari used a locking mechanism he had never seen before, so he improvised a bypass with a section of cable from his own suit's secondary power loop. Then warning lights began appearing on the panel above him. Outside he could not see it. He was 3 levels deep in engineering. The 2 Vari destroyers had completed their firing solution confirmation and were bringing their main weapons online. Kowalski connected the second conduit. The weapon system on the port side of the captured destroyer came online. Partially 30% capacity, 1 firing axis, it was enough. He opened the comm. Harlan, tell me which one you want. First. A pause. Brief. Your call, wrench, you built it. Kowalski looked at the targeting system and made a decision based on incomplete information and hard-earned instinct. Firing, he said. The captured destroyer shuddered as its own weapon discharged. Outside, one of the remaining Vari ships had not yet finished processing the possibility that the vessel they were preparing to fire on was preparing to fire back. It was destroyed before its crew could respond. The captured destroyer was dying by degrees, and Kowalski was the only thing arguing with it. He moved through the lower engineering sections with a salvage sled he had built from a Vari equipment cart and 2 sections of Iron Widow corridor grating, pulling components from both wrecks, human alloy plate, Vari power, coupling assemblies, sections of conduit that were close enough in diameter to make the marriage work if you were not precious about the join. He had been doing this for 19 minutes. His shoulder had stopped hurting, which was not a good sign, but he filed that with everything else. That wasn't a good sign, and kept moving. The ship talked to him constantly. Stress groans through the hole where the Iron Widow's bow sections were still embedded. Pressure fluctuations in the corridors as automated systems struggled to maintain atmosphere in compartments that no longer had the structural integrity to hold it. The drive core was running, but running wrong. A harmonic in the output that felt like a bad bearing, but was almost certainly damage to the primary field coil from the collision. He could not fix the field coil. He could work around it. Working around things was what he did. He found a section of Iron Widow's secondary power trunk still intact. Inside the breach zone. Human engineering familiar. Something he could read with his eyes closed. He cut it free and added it to the sled. Above him, through 2 decks of alien metal, Harlan was talking to the commander. The command area was a large hexagonal space with consoles arranged in a pattern that assumed the operators would be standing. Vari did not use chairs the way humans did, preferring a slight forward lean that their physiology found stable. Harlan had dragged a piece of equipment, casing across the floor and sat on it, which put him lower than the commander. And he did not care. The commander stood with his hands at his sides in that posture Griggs had seen before, the one that meant something in Vayari, culture that humans did not have in. Exact word for. Not surrender. Not defiance. Something between them. Petrov was by the door, weight on his good leg, weapon across his chest. 3 other crew members positioned around the space. Griggs stood 2 behind the commander and slightly to the left, which was where Griggs always stood when he wanted someone to forget he was there. Harlan looked at the commander for a moment without speaking. The wrist translator buzzed softly as it synchronized with the Vayori command network. Then he said, "Your 2 ships are gone, your crew is gone. This ship is damaged and we are inside it, and we are not leaving. The Iron Widow is breaking apart outside, and we have nowhere to go back to." He paused. "I need drive access and navigation. You have the authorization codes. I am not going to threaten you because you already know what the situation is, and threats would be an insult to both of us." The commander looked at him. The large still eyes moved across Harlan's face in a way that was not readable by human standards, not hostile, not calculating. Then the commander moved to the nearest console. He entered a long sequence. His fingers moved with precision and no hesitation. Not the movements of someone buying time, but of someone who had made a decision and was executing it cleanly. The console responded, a cascade of systems coming online across the board. Drive access opening up, navigation unlocking, the IFF transponder cycling to active. Harlan watched the board. He did not watch the commander's hands closely enough. Nobody did. The additional sequence was 4 inputs, buried at the end of the authorization. The same rhythm, the same cadence, indistinguishable from the rest unless you knew what you were looking for, and nobody in the room knew what they were looking for because they had never seen a Vayori ship defense protocol activate before. The emitters were in the ceiling, small, flush-mounted, the kind of thing you would not notice unless you were looking for them, and you would not be looking for them because they looked like ventilation components, and every ship had ventilation components. They activated without sound. The first emitter fired, a narrow beam punched through Petrov's visor and the back of his helmet in the same instant. Petrov had survived the iron wind burning around him and the breach and the corridor, fighting with a wound in his thigh that had never stopped bleeding. He died in a room that had seemed for just a moment like the part where things started going right. The crew member beside the port console went down at the same moment, someone who had made it through all of it, someone the others knew, someone they would remember later if any of them lived long enough to have a later. Griggs was already moving before the second emitter fired. He covered the 2M before the commander could finish the final input. Whatever sequence remained would have completed the protocol and turned the rest of the room into corpses. Griggs hit him from the side with everything he had and drove him into the console. The sequence never finished. What happened next was short and final. Griggs did not think about it afterward, because there was nothing to think about. The commander had made his last move. It had almost worked. Griggs stood up. The room was very still. Harlan looked at Petrov by the door for a long moment. His expression did not change, not because he did not care, but because loss had been part of the job for so long that he no longer showed it the way other people did. He looked at the board. The drive access was live. The navigation was open. IFF transponder was broadcasting. Kowalski, he said into the comm. His voice was flat and even. Sir, Kowalski said. Purge the authorization system. Rebuild. Access from scratch. I don't want anything. The commander access still running. Copy. Give me 12 minutes. You have 10. I'll make 10 work. Harlan stood up, looked at Petrov one more time. Then he turned to the two crew members, still standing, and said, "Take care of them." They did. Kowalski purged the system and rebuilt it in 9 minutes and 40 seconds, which was not a record but was close. He worked with the drive access open in front of him and the salvage sled beside him. Rebuilding the authorization system was no different from any other repair. First figure out what it was supposed to do, then find a way to make it do it again. He layered human encryption over the Viore command network. The result would have horrified anyone formally trained in either system. It worked anyway. While he worked, he also finished the drive repair. The field coil was not fixable. He had established that 20 minutes ago and moved on. What he could do was shift part of the load onto the backup coil systems the Viore had built into the drive. They had never intended them to be used this way, but they were there. The modification would reduce drive output by 30% and leave a constant vibration running through the ship. Annoying, not fatal. He welded the last human conduit section into the Viore power distribution board, and the join held, and the drive output stabilized into something that was not good but was functional. He looked at what he had built. Human alloy plate covered Viore hull. Breeches, Iron Widow conduit fed Viore. Power systems. Emergency sealant from 3 different sources held joints that had never been designed to fit together. Somehow, they were holding. The ship groaned around him. He put his hand on the wall and felt the vibration running through the structure. "Admiral," he said, "she'll move." The last Viore destroyer had been running recalibration for 11 minutes. It was moving in now. Slow, precise. The way Viore ships moved when they were being careful. Harlan watched it on the forward display. The Viore navigation system was running, and he could not read the script, but he could read the tactical geometry, and the geometry was clear. "Kowalski, I see it. How long on the weapons conduit? It'll fire once. After that, the rerouting fails and we have nothing. Once is enough." Harlan watched the destroyer for another second. "Fire," he said. The captured destroyer shuddered as the weapons conduit discharged. The shot crossed the distance between the ships and the time it took to breathe. Once, the last Viore destroyer had not accounted for the possibility that a ship running on salvaged human conduit, an improvised authorization, architecture, and 30% drive capacity would fire first. The detonation was clean and total. No secondary explosions. The shot had taken the destroyer's power core and the power core had done the rest. The destroyer was gone. Kowalski looked at the weapon's conduit. Reading on his board, it had failed exactly as predicted. Rerouting burned out on the discharge. The system reading dead across every indicator. The Iron Widow finished breaking apart. 20 minutes later, not with any particular violence. The structural stresses that had been building since the collision simply reached the point where the remaining connections between the broken sections could not hold the pieces in relation to each other, and they separated. The midsection split completely. The aft section carrying the engines and drive core drifted away from the rest and began a slow rotation that would continue for a very long time. Harlan watched it on the display. Griggs came and stood beside him, did not say anything. The two of them watched the Iron Widow come apart in silence while the captured destroyer's damaged drive pushed them slowly away from the debris field. They were leaving. The crew that remained moved through the alien vessel in near silence. They sealed compartments, checked suit integrity, and tended to the wounded in the pressurized sections Kowalski had stabilized. Nobody was talking much. Work still needed doing, so they did it. Kowalski came up from engineering and, hour later, moved to the engineering console and ran a full systems check. The results were not good by any conventional standard. The drive harmonic was still there, vibrating through every surface of the ship. Several hull repairs were holding by margins he would never have accepted on the Iron Widow. The weapon system was dead and would remain dead until someone gave him a proper facility and enough replacement parts to work with. Life support was stable, navigation was running, the drive was pushing them in the right direction. For now that was enough. He filed the rest under later and went to find something to eat. Harlan stood at the forward display. Long after the Iron Widow's aft section disappeared from sensor range, the command area was quiet. The ship vibrated steadily beneath his boots, the constant reminder of a drive system being forced to operate in a configuration its designers had never intended. He rested his cybernetic hand against the console and looked out into the dark. Behind them, the debris field continued to spread, human metal and VRE alloy turning slowly together in the void. The Iron Widow was part of it now. Each corridor he had ever walked, every repair Kowalski had ever cursed over, every name on the crew manifest that no longer needed updating, gone. Ahead lay human space. There would be reports, questions, people who had not been there trying to understand what had happened out here with words that would not fit. He already knew what he would tell them. The VRE came with 3 destroyers. We left with 1. And GT, hey there, space human, I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind, or just say hi if you prefer music. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, music, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here or here if you want music, the whole playlist. See you there.